Greetings, family. Welcome to the African Exodus show. I'm your host, Tierney Cherie, here to you with a new video. Before I get started on today's video, I want to remind you all, if you have not already, please do add yourself to my Telegram channel if you want to get notifications of my video without relying on YouTube. So the link to that is down below. All right, so this is going to wrap up the series that we did on the founding of America. We started off talking about the Knights Templar, which was a secret society that operated inside of the American continent. Well, came to the American continent from Europe. They were really more so operating in Europe, but they fled to the American continent. So we started off talking about them. Then we spent some time talking about America's founding fathers, who were Freemasons. We transitioned from that to talking more about the Freemason conspiracy, their conspiracy to start different revolutions, start different wars, and basically use that as a basis to launch their programming. Today, we're going to end off, though, talking about the end goal as far as America. What was America put here for? What is it a setup to accomplish? We know that America is the new Atlantis. What does the new Atlantis mean? How is that going to be done? I believe the big way that's going to be done is through the money, the mighty dollar. If you look at the dollar, this is the most openly blatant Masonic instrument used inside of the United States. Literally on the dollar bill, you have a all-seeing eye. You have we'll talk about what that eagle really is. The eagle that we'll talk about more about it. The imagery is all there. The Masonic nature of the United States is out there for anyone who wants to see it. If you don't want to see it, maybe you don't see it. But if you are open to what the truth is, then it's very clear and evident. Now, what is all this for, though? Why have these Masonic imageries on the dollar? What is the dollar supposed to do? How is it that this dollar is what's going to succeed in accomplishing the New World Order? That's what we're going to deal with today. So first, we're going to start with going through a book, actually, that I read. We'll start with the chapter 2, that is In God We Trust. So it says, on July 22nd, 1946, at the end of World War II, an agreement was signed at the conference between 44 nations in which the other countries agreed to value their currencies in relation to the dollar, rather than gold, silver, or anything else. The U.S. then set the value of the dollar at $35 per ounce of gold and agreed to redeem dollars held by central banks of other nations with gold upon demand. However, this led to a steady loss of U.S. gold reserves until finally in 1971, President Richard Nixon closed the gold window, announcing that the holdings of foreign central banks would no longer be redeemed for gold by the U.S. government. Now, I think we have to understand the monumentalness of what happened whenever the U.S. went off of the gold standard. Literally, you have a currency that was backed by a natural mineral that was valuable. So gold, we know, is valuable because it's rare depending on where you are. So this natural mineral was really the currency, although the U.S. was just there. The U.S. dollar was there. It was really a representation of this gold currency. However, you have now the U.S. dollar going off of the gold standard. So they're saying this piece of paper is now going to represent itself. It's going to stand on its own, not backed by anything. So the paper is backed by nothing. Yet this currency has still remained the most powerful currency today. How is that possible? Well, they said this is the final step in abandoning the gold standard. Now, the value of the dollar floats freely in relation to foreign currencies with no fixed standard of value. The value of a dollar can only be manipulated by the market forces of the economy and by the actions of the Federal Reserve. The result has been rapidly expanding inflation, which began during the Richard Nixon years and which has been felt by all the foreign currencies that were pegged to the dollar. Many of these currencies have repeatedly failed, and the governments of their countries have remained continually insolvent. Now, William Grider, he wrote in Secrets of the Temple how the Federal Reserve runs. Above all, money is a function of faith. It requires an implicit and universal social consent that is indeed mysterious. To create money and use it, each one must believe, and everyone must believe. Only then do the worthless pieces of paper take on value. When a society loses faith in money, it is implicitly losing faith in itself. The money process requires a deep, unacknowledged act of faith, so mysterious that it could easily be confused for divine powers. It might sound like he's just, saying things that are poetic and nice and sweet and, just flowery language, right? But understand what he's saying. The US dollar, again, piece of paper, not backed by anything, the most powerful currency in the world. This currency has to be believed in by everyone. Everyone has to have faith in the dollar. If I give you $20, you'll probably be happy. Why? Because you have faith that you actually receive something, even though you don't think about the fact that this is just made of paper, made from a tree. This is something that is necessary in order for the dollar to function. And he calls this mysterious. He says that it is about faith. He says that it requires a deep faith and divine powers. Currency eventually collapses, just as all the devil's creations turn out, and this played to be illusions. It is my belief that the Freemasons and other occultists have been responsible for creating the United States. The members of the Federal Reserve Board are in many ways like sorcerers, conjuring wealth seemingly out of thin air and distributing it at the will to transform the American economy according to their desires. These objects thus act as magical charms, containing a unit of magical charge that is passed on from one person to the next and multiplied as the money changes hands. They also act as tokens of communal trust and fidelity to the dollar as an institution. The symbols and key phrases associated with it thus work to enchant the public into a mass hypnotic spell in which the mind of each individual confirms the consensus belief in the power of the dollar and its ability to multiply itself as it moves through the system. Every time a person spends a dollar or accepts a dollar as payment, they are confirming their belief in the dollar and using it to exercise their spiritual will. The words "in God we trust" are meant to inspire faith in the dollar as a currency and faith in the American Republic. One should trust the dollar the one way should trust in God, for it is implied that God himself has chosen to favor the U.S. The question I've always asked is, what God is they already talking to in God we trust when you literally have a Masonic pyramid on the dollar? Now it says the bill's design illustrates how we are all connected through the web of commerce. The bald eagle on the Great Seal looks a bit peculiar. Masonic expert Manly P. Hall claimed that it was meant to secretly represent the phoenix, the mystical bird which internally dies and is reborn, and which is a symbol of transformation in alchemy. Indeed, the original proposals for the design of the seal did call for a phoenix instead. Well, this is the perfect segment to the documentary. We're going to watch some segments of the Eye of the Phoenix, but what are the key things to take away from what is being said? Are these Masonic symbols on the dollar just put there for looks, for artistic, or just artistic liberties? Or are they there to actually do something? If you believe in the spiritual natural, you know that the supernatural, you know that these symbols are not meaningless. So are these symbols actually doing something in the here and now? And when it comes to the phoenix, and we'll talk about this, why a phoenix? Why was that going to be what was on the US dollar? Does that tell you the purpose, the true purpose of the US dollar? We're going to talk about all that as we go through this documentary.
The nature of the Great Seal is so mysterious that some believe that it came from a supernatural force. An account recorded by Dr. Robert Hieronymus in his book, Founding Fathers, Secret Societies, says that the Great Seal was given to Thomas Jefferson by a mysterious cloaked figure.
I love that story. The Founding Fathers were trying to get the Great Seal of the United States designed, and they needed to have a design for the Great Seal to represent our nation. And Jefferson went outside in the night, and up came a person, an individual who was wearing a cloak he couldn't totally see, and he had in his hands the Great Seal of the United States. And he basically said, or this being said, you know, you're struggling over the symbol for our nation? Here it is.
This is very believable because if you understand how Lucifer works and operates inside of this world, a lot of times people who aren't the most talented, the people who don't have the most gifted imagination, they are literally given things through the spiritual realm. And so this idea that, notice he said it's a being that gave the Great Seal, not necessarily a man. that some being actually delivered the seal to Thomas Jefferson is very much, I think, on brand as far as what this country represents, what this country was created to do. This is something that is not of the natural. This is something of the supernatural.
The account reads that Jefferson told a strange story. A man approached him wearing a black cloak that practically covered him, face and all, and told him that he, the strange visitor, knew they were trying to devise a seal, and that he had a design which was appropriate and meaningful.
How did he know that they were trying to devise a seal if he were not of another realm?
Jefferson, of course, looked at it, according to this story, and said, "This is it. This is it." He knew it was it, and it was right. So he supposedly came running back into whatever, whether it was a tent or whatever it was, and he showed it to other individuals, and he told them about, they met this person outside. Of course, they went outside to go to find the guy, and he's gone. So supposedly we'll never find out who designed the Great Seal of the United States.
While Dr. Huron,
I can tell you who. So it's not that hard to figure out. But of course, particularly when you understand the destiny of America, it's not hard to figure out who created the Great Seal and what purpose they were trying to achieve. But the documentary goes into more detail about the specific purpose of the dollar, and we're going to really forward for that particular clip, because I want you to understand the point of the dollar is that the dollar die, because it's going to be reborn. So more on this point, whenever I was first doing research into the US dollar, really y'all had put it into my spirit, and I kept seeing visuals of the eagle on the US dollar. I never thought about it. If anything, you all know that the more eye catcher as far as people who understand symbolism is usually going to be the one-eyed symbol on the pyramid. That's the one that usually makes you like, why is this on our currency? I never thought about the eagle. I never questioned whether or not this was a satanic representation of anything. And so that is actually the answer that y'all gave me when you led me to this exact documentary. And this point is the one that I want to highlight. Now, again, watch this full documentary, because all of the US dollar, satanic symbols from the left to the right, from the beginning to the end, all over it. Satanic symbols. However, we're going to focus on that eagle, because that is really the purpose, the eagle. Don't focus on the pyramid so much and forget about the eagle. What does the eagle represent? Why was the eagle chosen? So the documentary gets into that right now.
and what will all these things mean for the future destiny of America? According to David Ovison, it was Manly Hall who influenced the placement of 72 stones on the Great Pyramid of the dollar bill, since the number 72 is said to be a magical number in the occult. It was also Hall who taught that the American eagle was a cleverly disguised phoenix bird. In his writings, he documents this account from the 1st century AD. There is a certain bird which is called a phoenix, and when the time of its dissolution draws near that it must die, it builds itself a nest. But as the flesh decays, a certain kind of worm is produced.
Builds itself a nest. A certain kind of worm is produced. When you understand the seeds that are being planted in this season, the spiritual things that are happening behind the scenes and in front of our face, there are things that are being planted, and there's going to be an end. It's going to be a really significant end, one that many of us are probably not prepared for, because again, this is the destiny of the US dollar. So let's learn a little bit more about that.
According to this account, it is from this worm that the phoenix is reborn. This concept of a phoenix worm in its nest seems to be represented at the top of this column on a building found in Europe. But in Washington, D.C., up at the tops of the 72 columns of the National Archives building, we find nearly identical carvings.
All over DC, the things you will see when you understand architecture. But let that resonate. A phoenix bird worm. Why was that put inside of the National Archives building of all things? What point does that have to do with this capital of the United States, this beacon of hope, so to speak? Why would they want to represent that?
All perched beneath the throne of destiny itself. Could this somehow be a veiled reference to the secret destiny of America? Watching the strength of the American dollar decline, we consider America's founder, George Washington.
A Freemason, as we went into great detail inside of the previous videos in this series.
Found his image on the face of the dollar is said to be an omega symbol, signifying the end. But what end? Many researchers have come to believe that the plan of these Luciferian societies is that, like the phoenix of old, the America that we know will ultimately be destroyed, and that from her ashes will be born a new world order.
This gives another meaning to dollars. What are you getting when you accumulate them, and who is rewarded with dollars versus others who aren't necessarily rewarded, who gets to be inside of the higher echelons of society. So I want to go to scripture. 2 Corinthians 4, it says, "In whose case the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that they will not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of Yah." Again, this is Matthew 4. Again, the devil took him along to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these things I will give to you if you fall down and worship me." Then Yeshua said to him, "Go away, Satan, for it is written, you should only worship Yahuwah your Elohim and serve him only." Think about what this says. This essentially saying is there's a God of this world, and it's not Elohim, the one and only. It's not Yahuwah. There's a God of this world who is controlling everything. And we're told which one it is. It's Satan. Literally took the Son of God, took him up on a high hill and said, "If you worship me, I'll give you all of these things. I'll give you this entire world." So when you hear people say that they are having a currency, and this currency is going to be "in God we trust," is it possible that that currency, the power that it's eliciting, is from that prince of this world, or who we know as Lucifer or Satan or the devil, whatever you call him? Now, beside that point, I want to talk a little bit more about the fact that the US dollar is supposedly collapsing. A lot of people are happy about it. A lot of people are cheering. Noticeably, and I brought this up inside of the African news segment, a lot of people aren't looking at the fact that it doesn't seem like the US is doing too much to control the fact that its currency is falling. So let's read this article, just a part of it. The US is facing a major challenge as petrodollar loses force. On January 17th, the Saudi Minister of Finance, Mohammed Al-Jadaan, announced that Saudi state is open to selling oil in currencies other than the dollar. There are no issues with discussing how we settle our trade arrangements, whether it's in the dollar or whether it's in the euro. It says, if the Saudi regime indeed embraced substantial trade in currencies other than the dollar as part of its oil export business, this would signal a shift away from the dollar as a dominant global currency, and global oil payments are measured another way. This would signal the end of the so-called petrodollar. Many people have been cheering this on, understandably, because the US dollar has been an instrument of terrorism all over the world. It has been used as a way to control countries, control leaders, control politicians, to literally control or colonize the entire third world or the global south, and make them capitulate to United States interests and demands. That's literally what the US dollar has been doing. So it's understandable why people are cheering on this BRICS currency, but I did say, and I want to just bring this up again, is this happening without the consent of those entities that are in power? So let's go to one article. We're going to first talk about what happened when a certain country called Iraq decided to distance itself from the US dollar. Now, it says, interestingly, just 5 hours after American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, it's talking about 9/11, 5 hours after it crashed into the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld began ordering his staff to develop plans for a strike on Iraq. Iraq didn't have anything to do with this. So you're ordering a strike on Iraq after 9/11. Despite the fact that there was absolutely no evidence linking the country or its leader, Saddam Hussein, to the 9/11 attacks. When reports later came in that the 3 hijackers involved in the 9/11 attacks were connected to Al-Qaeda, Rumsfeld repeatedly became so determined to find a rationale for an attack on Iraq that on 10 separate occasions, he asked the CIA to find evidence linking Iraq to the terror attacks of September 11th. The CIA repeatedly came back empty-handed. You might be asking why? Why the quick reaction that you want to instantly pin this on Iraq? Well, there's some context here. On September 24th, 2000, Saddam Hussein allegedly emerged from a meeting of his government and proclaimed that Iraq would soon transition its oil export transactions to the euro currency. Not long after this meeting, Saddam Hussein began preparing to make the switch from pricing his country's oil exports in greenbacks to euros. To euros. As renegade and newsworthy this action was on the part of Iraq, it was sparsely reported in the corporate-controlled media. Clark comments on the limited media coverage on page 31 of his books. He says, CNN ran a very short article on its website on October 20th, 2000. But after one day of the news cycle, the issue of Iraq switch to petro-euro essentially disappeared from all 5 of the corporate-owned media outlets. By 2002, Saddam Hussein had fully converted to petro-euro, in essence dumping the dollar. On March 19th, 2003, George W. Bush announced the commencement of a full-scale invasion of Iraq 1 year later. According to Clark and Engdahl, Saddam's bold threat to the petrodollar system had invited the full force and fury of the U.S. military onto his front yard. Was the Iraq war really about weapons of mass destruction, Al-Qaeda, fighting terrorism, and promoting democracy? Or was America's stated purpose to liberate the Iraqi people from a brutal regime actually a clever guise for making an example of a nation who dared to threaten the petrodollar? So this is very important to understand how they deal with individual countries coming out and saying we're going to switch away from the US dollar. Usually what they'll do is they'll send their forces, try to talk reason with the leader and whatnot. Let's do this, behind closed doors. Let's get you to back down, which is why I said when people are so excited, when the leader comes out and says this, just wait and watch. So usually that's what happens though. Instantly, they send their hitmen and the leader might change their tone. But in this case, the United States goes in and puts these fake charges on Iraq that they were the ones putting up these weapons of mass destruction, all in an effort to go in and change their currency back to the petrodollar. Something else that's interesting about this, though, you would think because they switched to the euro, the European countries would try to help Iraq or try to push back against the United States, try to more be outwardly condemn the U.S. I mean, even a country like Britain joined in to the Iraq war, despite the fact that they were on a euro at that time. The fact, though, that no European country did so tells you that this whole U.S. being the reserve currency of the world, it's not something that's being done without the consent of the powerful inside of Europe. They are consenting to this system. They're consenting to Western hegemony with the dollar. Let's be very clear about that. They're not trying to push their currency ahead. So one more example, and then we'll drive the point home. Gaddafi. I've talked about him so many times on this channel. Let's just talk about it again, because honestly, you can never talk about how crazy what this was enough. So what was NATO's violent intervention in Libya really about? Now we know, writes Ellen Brown, thanks to Hillary Clinton's recent published emails. It was to prevent the creation of an independent hard currency in Africa that would free the continent from economic bondage under the dollar. The IMF and the French African franc shaking off the last heavy change of colonial exploitation. Before 2011, Libya had achieved economic independence. Let me say this again to paint the picture for you. Libya had achieved economic independence with its own water, its own food, own oil, own money, its own state-owned bank. It had arisen under Gaddafi from one of the poorest countries to the richest in Africa. Yes, that was what was happening in Libya, this horrible country, right? Education and medical treatment were free. Having a home was considered a human right, and Libyans participated in an original system of local democracy. The country boasted the world's largest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River Project, which brought water from the desert to the cities and coastal areas, and Gaddafi was embarking on a program to spread this model throughout Africa. Would have been revolutionary, correct? Now, of 3,000 emails released by Hillary Clinton's private email server in late December 2015, about a third were from her close confidant, Sidney Blumenthal, the attorney who defended her husband in the Monica Lewinsky case. One of these emails, dated April 2nd, 2011, reads, Gaddafi's government holds 143 tons of gold and a similar amount of silver. This gold was accumulated prior to the current rebellion and was intended to be used to establish a pan-African currency on the Libyan golden dinar. This plan was designed to provide the Francophone countries with an alternative to the French CFA franc. In a source comment, the original declassified email adds, according to knowledgeable individuals, this quantity of gold and silver is valued at more than $7 billion. French intelligence officers discovered this plan shortly after the current rebellion began, and this was one of the factors that influenced President Nicolas Sarkozy's decision to commit France to an attack on Libya. According to these individuals, Sarkozy's plans are driven by the following issues. 1, a desire to gain a greater share of Libya's oil production. 2, increase French influence in North Africa. They did a bad job at that. But 3, improve his internal political situation in France. 4, provide the French military an opportunity to reassert its position in the world. And 5, address the concerns of his advisors over Gaddafi's long-term plans to supplant France as the dominant power in Francophone Africa. The article goes on to say that Gaddafi threatened to attempt an independent African currency. It was not taken lightly by Western interests. In 2011, Sarkozy reportedly called the Libyan leader a threat to the financial security of the world. How dare you have an independent African currency? Gaddafi had done more to organize an African monetary coup. He had demonstrated that financial independence could be achieved. His greatest infrastructure project, the Man-Made River, was turning arid regions into a breadbasket for Libya. And $33 billion project was being funded interest-free without foreign debt through Libya's own state-owned bank. I want to repeat that. This project was being done debt-free. Something they will never, ever want to see happen in Africa, because every single project has to be done where they're getting paid for it, and they're continuing to enslave that economy, where they're giving them loans that they know that they're going to default on. That's what they're okay with. They're not okay with this situation, though. This could explain why this critical piece of infrastructure was destroyed in 2011. NATO not only bombed the pipeline, but finished off the project by bombing the factory producing the pipes necessary to repair it. This is what NATO did. A lake that was a source of irrigation to the Libyan people. They bombed it, and they bombed the factory that's making its pipes. So they wanted to be done away with. This act of autonomy by this country, you wonder why autonomy makes them mad, because it goes against their order. Crippling a civilian irrigation system served up to 70% of the population. Looks hardly like humanitarian intervention. Rather, as Canadian professor Maximilien Forte put in his heavily researched book, Slouching Towards CERT, NATO's War in Libya and Africa, he said the goal of the U.S. military's intervention was to disrupt an emerging pattern of independence and a network of collaboration within Africa that would facilitate increased African self-reliance. This is at odds with the geostrategic and political economic ambitions of extra-continental European powers, namely the U.S. I never stop getting upset whenever I read about what happened to Libya. But the point I'm making is, this was all done because a country said, we want to distance ourselves from the US dollar. All of this, destruction, mayhem. We know now Libya is a cesspool of slavery and chaos because of what NATO did. Not to mention Iraq, cesspool of chaos because of what the United States military did. When we see the BRICS countries coming out one by one by one, not just them, but other countries that are not a part of BRICS, weaker countries, they are coming out saying similar things about the US dollar. We just went back and spoke about what the legacy of the US dollar is, what it's supposed to accomplish. Some might say that it's accomplishing that already because we heard the Federal Reserve putting out a digital currency, but we also have talks of a new currency. Could it be that the reason that the CIA, the deep state, is allowing these conversations to happen because this was what the dollar was designed to do? Going back to the purpose of the US dollar, the purpose of it is to die and then be reborn as a new creature. This new creature would be, I believe, the end times currency, the one that will allow no one to buy or sell without the beast system being able to know who you are, where you are, basically everything about you. That currency, that is the reason why the US dollar must die, because the US dollar obviously doesn't have those powers. We do see that that capability exists now, but it exists inside of the realm of digital currency, cryptocurrencies. So that is really where I'll end it for you, just giving you the question. Do you think that these BRICS currencies, these other currencies that are being spoken about by even lesser, weaker countries, and we know how the United States deals with countries that try to assert autonomy from the US dollar, yet they've been letting this slide left and right lately, right? Do you think that this is actually because the US sees these people as a threat, or they see this as a fulfillment of their Masonic destiny? I'll leave you with that question. Thank you all for watching. I will see you on the next video.
What is it revolting against? The power structure. The American power structure? No. The French power structure? No. The English power structure? No. Then what power structure? An international Western power structure.
You know, my mother had an expression, out of everything terrible, something good will come if you look hard enough for it. I think this presents us with some significant opportunities to make some real changes. You know, we are at an inflection point, I believe, in the world economy. Not just the world economy, in the world. It occurs every 3 or 4 generations. As one of the top military people said to me in a secure meeting the other day, 60 million people died between 1900 and 1946. And since then, we established a liberal world order, and that hadn't happened in a long while. A lot of people dying, but nowhere near the chaos. And now is a time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there. There's going to be a new world order out there. And we've got to lead it. And we've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it. So anyway, I'm going to hush up, Mary, fire away.
The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that our old systems are not fit anymore for the 21st century. It has laid bare the fundamental lack of social cohesion, fairness, inclusion, and equality. In short, we need a great reset.
This is an historic moment. We have in this past year made great progress in ending the long era of conflict and Cold War. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
The US presidential motorcade arrives at the United Nations, passing the ever-present groups of demonstrators assembled on the other side of the road. A sense of anticipation in the General Assembly chamber, and a warm reception for Barack Obama as he walks to the podium, his wife seated among the heads of state and dignitaries.
The time has come for the world to move in a new direction. We must embrace a new era of engagement based on mutual interest and mutual respect, and our work must begin now.
And the president outlined his vision of a new world order, in which the US would participate fully, one rooted on 4 basic principles.
Non-proliferation and disarmament, the promotion of peace and security, the preservation of our planet, and a global economy that advances opportunity for all people.
Among the speakers that followed the US president, the leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, speaking at the UN for the first time after 40 years in power. And waving the UN Charter, he called for an end to any permanent membership of the Security Council, arguing that small nations should have the same rights as the big. It was a speech that lasted well over an hour and covered subjects ranging from jet lag to political assassinations.
And then the assassination or the killing of Kennedy in 63 or 62, the President of the United States of America. Why? We want to know who killed him. Somebody who, by the name of Lee Harvey, and then another Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey. Why did he kill him?
Earlier, the UN Secretary General had opened proceedings, sticking to his allotted time, calling for international unity.
If ever there were a time to act in a spirit of renewed multilateralism, a moment to create a United Nations of genuine collective action, it is now. Now is our time, a time to put the united back into the United Nations. United in purpose, united in action.
And a reminder that this UN building is due to be closed for renovation at the end of these proceedings.
Our common ambition is to make this outward renovation the symbol of inward renewal.
A renewal, importantly, in which the United States says it is willing to both lead and be part of.